All right, guys, it's a new dawn. It's a new passage, but it is the same old strategies. It's also the same passage order. So since we've already done a fiction and a social science and a natural science, we know that this passage 4 is going to be, whoop. Well, that was less magical. Oh, my system updated. Is going to be global conversation. Its job is going to be to persuade. Okay? These are the most overtly argumentative pieces. We can see that this one was written in 1805, and it's titled History of the Rise, Progress, and Termination of the American Revolution. So this is written the time period just after the American Revolution. So we've just fought for independence from England, and this is Otis Warren's commentary on that. So let's go ahead and start diagnosing questions. Number 33, over the course of the passage, feels very developmental pattern, and it's asking about a shift and focus. So when I see the focus shift, I'm going to mark that on my page with a big straight line so I know that something is different above and below it. All right, I already see serves to, that caught my eye, so I can label this as purpose function. And I'm looking at this image of the child learning to walk in line 7. So let me go ahead and bracket line 7. I'm going to bracket that, but I'm also going to underline this child just learning to walk so that I know that that's my focus. It's not a word in context. I'm not circling it, but as I pay attention to this, I want to pay attention to that image as well. Warren implies very clear inference and suggestion. It does not have a COE follow-up, so we need to see what he's implying. Implies that after Americans won independence, they questioned whether they would be. So I'm just going to put after independence, they question something. So they question something about their existence. Like, so now we are free. We have our independence from Great Britain, but what's going to happen now? Would we be some kind of way? All right, Warren contrasts. Okay, so nothing obvious, but he's asking for a very specific piece of information from the passage, and we know these to be content and characterization questions. He's asking about a specific piece of content in the passage. Again, no COE follow-up, so we need to know what he's contrasting. So I'm going to say he contrasts America's knowledge of different areas of study with their unworldly view of something. So I'm going to say American knowledge with their view. All right, number 37, in the passage, so we know that to be a content or an inference, and we're looking for a characterization, so that is a content and characterization question, and we're looking for a COE follow-up. It has one, so we don't need to know what that question is asking quite yet. All right, Warren claims, that's a fancy way to say says, so again, I know this is a content and characterization. It has a COE, but it's not a COE follow-up. It's not a previous question. That's a standalone, so we need to know what this one is asking about. So claims there is a historical pattern of governance that should serve as a warning, okay? In that most successful government is some kind of way. So we're going to see this historical pattern in government. Most successful governments are this, that, and the other, and that idea should be a warning to Americans. All right, so again, we have a COE follow-up, or not a COE follow-up, a COE standalone. Don't need to worry about that one. It'll kind of answer itself. 41 is an obvious word in context. We're looking at 48, the word secure. So let's go ahead and circle it. Let's see, 48, and the word secure. And then the last question, in the last paragraph, Warren states that rulers are appointed through deceptive means and by. Okay, so in the passage is kind of what this is saying. It's telling us exactly where. And Warren states. So this is going to be another content question. It doesn't have a COE follow-up. So we need to see how are rulers appointed. And it's going to be deception and. So there's going to be two elements. One of them is going to be deception or lying or deceit or something like that. And then we need to see what that second one is. So let's give ourselves our roadmap. So we need to keep our eye out for a shift in focus. We need to look at what this child learning to walk image is doing, what its role is in the piece, how it's functioning. We need to find out something after the revolution is over, after we've won our independence, and something that Americans are worried about or questioning or considering. We need to look at American knowledge of studies, like academic knowledge, versus something that is contrasted with that. We need to look at a historical pattern and how that acts as a warning. And then we need to look for how rulers are appointed. So let's go and start reading the passage itself. Okay. But though the connection was now dissolved, this connection between Great Britain and America, and the guardian knot of union between Great Britain and America cut in sunder, so we've separated from Great Britain, though the independence of the United States was, by treaty, clearly established on the broad basis of liberty, yet the Americans felt themselves in such a state of infancy that as a child just learning to walk, they were afraid of their own movements. Okay, so it's comparing America to a toddler. We're so young in our independence that we know we can walk, but it's like when you watch a little kid that knows it can walk, but it also knows that it's probably going to fall down. It's a little bit afraid to move. So it's comparing America to that. Their debts were unpaid, their governments unsettled, and the people out of breath by their long struggle for the freedom and independence of their country. So it's almost like they're afraid because they're exhausted also, and things are a little bit in chaos, and so they don't really know what to do next. They were become poor from the loss of trade, the neglect of their usual occupations because they've been busy fighting in this war, and the drains from every quarter for the support of a long and expensive war. From the versatility of human affairs and the encroaching spirit of man, it was yet uncertain when and how the states would be tranquilized and the Union consolidated under wise, energetic, and free modes of government, or whether such, if established, would be administered agreeable to laws founded on the beautiful theory of republicanism, depicted in the closets of philosophers and idolized in the imagination of most of the inhabitants of America. Okay, so it kind of... this might be something that they're wondering, because it said like after their freedom was established, they were wondering, like they were questioning something. This sounds a little questiony, so I'm going to put a star next to that just in case. It is indeed true that from a general attention to early education, the people of the United States were better informed in many branches of literature than the common classes of men in most other countries. So I think this is going to answer that piece about contrast Americans' knowledge of different areas of study with something. So I think this yet is going to introduce what it's contrasting with. So we see that they're better informed in branches of literature than the common classes of men in most other countries. So we're well educated, but this yet, many of them had but a superficial knowledge of mankind. So that's where we're lacking. They were ignorant of the intrigues of courts, and though convinced of the necessity of government, did not fully understand its nature or origin. So all this stuff about like ruling and government and kind of this human connection piece, they are confused about or don't know much about it. But to shake off the yoke of foreign domination and annihilate the name of king. Okay, so I wonder why that's italicized. That seems like it might be important. They were not generally sensible that most established modes of strong government are usually the consequence of fraud or violence. So we had something about like the historical government piece, like governments are historically established on, so I think that might be important later too. Also, fraud seems a little bit like deception. Against the systems of democratic theorists, they were not sensible that from age to age the people are flattered, deceived, or threatened. Oh, we have deceived right here too. Until the hoodwinked multitudes set their own seals to renunciation of their privileges, and with their own hands rivet the chains of servitude on their posterity. They were totally fearless of the intrigues of the ambition of their own countrymen, which might in time render fruitless the expense of their blood and their treasures. These they had freely lavished to secure their equality of condition. So is this like gain or ensure, or some combination of gain and ensure to make sure that we have it, or to get access to? And their exemption from public burdens beyond the necessary demands for the support of a free and equal government. Okay, they had freely lavished these things, so their fruitless expense, their blood and their treasures. They had lavished their blood and treasures to gain equality of condition, their easy modes of subsistence, and their exemption from public burdens beyond the necessary demands for the support of a free and equal government. Okay. But it was not long before they were awakened to new energies by convulsions both at home and abroad. Ooh, so there's some like unrest. New created exigencies, or more splendid modes of government that might hereafter be adopted, had not yet come within the reach of their calculations. Of these, few had yet formed any adequate ideas, and fewer indeed were sensible that though the name of liberty delights the ear and tickles the fond pride of man, it is a jewel much oftener the plaything of his imagination than a possession of real stability. It may be acquired today in all the triumph of independent feelings, but perhaps tomorrow the world may be convinced that mankind know not how to make a proper use of the prize, generally battered in a short time as a useless bauble, to the first officious master that will take the burden from the mind by laying another on the shoulder of tenfold weight. Woo! Okay. This is the usual course of human conduct. However painful the reflection may be to the patriot in retirement and to the philosopher absorbed in theoretic disquisition of human liberty, or the portion of natural and political freedom to which man has a claim. The game of deception is played over and over to mislead the judgment of men and work on their enthusiasm until by their own consent, hereditary crowns and distinctions are fixed. Oh, you know what? That deception thing talked about how we gain leaders. So I wonder if this is the deception that talks about that. So the game of deception is played over and over to mislead the judgment of men and work on their enthusiasm until by their own consent, so maybe this is the second thing, crowns and distinctions are fixed, so we pick our leaders. And some scion of royal descent is entailed upon them forever. Thus, by habit, they are ready to believe that mankind in general are capable of the enjoyment of that liberty or freedom which nature seems to prescribe, and that the mass of the people have not the capacity nor the right to choose their own masters. Whew! Okay, that was a lot. I'm not going to lie. There's chunks of that were really difficult to process, but I'm hoping that I don't need to process them because they didn't remind me of any questions. If something reminds me of a question, I'll stop and give it some second thought. But if not, I may just kind of burn through it and hope that if it is part of a question, it's part of a COE. So let's try to answer these. Did we notice a shift? You know what? We didn't mark anything, but let's go back and kind of remind ourselves of the paragraphs. So we learn about the fact that we have our freedom, but we're a little nervous. And then we learn about, like, we're still kind of nervous here, and we don't know, like, what type of government we might have. And then we kind of have this idea of, like, it's true that we are confident and well-informed about this idea, but we're unsure about this. And then we kind of talk about, like, the roles of government and how we move. So I'm wondering if, like, there might be a shift kind of around here-ish somewhere, like, kind of between these ideas. So let's see what we can find. Focus shifts from an analysis of the difficulties facing Americans to a reflection on the repercussions of a human characteristic. Maybe, because below that line, they kind of talk about this idea that people are not generally sensible, and then we learn later that, like, we've, like, given everything to secure our freedom, but that could be easily taken away, or we're, like, too lazy to kind of deal with it. So I don't not like that answer. Let's see if we can find something else. A warning about America's government to a critique of Great Britain's government. I don't think that's necessarily true because we don't get that warning first off, so I think that makes this part wrong. A description of America's education system to an analysis of a specific philosophy. Education is briefly mentioned, but it's not the main focus, and therefore it's not something that we have to shift away from. It's actually a detail supporting an idea. So I think C is incorrect for that reason. A recollection of the end of the war to a recommendation that Americans implement a democratic system. You know, even if that first part was okay, we don't get a specific recommendation about what system to implement. It's more just kind of a general discussion of the problems of establishing government and how difficult that is. I also think the recollection is not necessarily of the end of the war in particular. It's so far after the war that I think we're beyond that. So A must be the answer. Even though it felt a little convoluted, I think we're able to make more connections from this one than any of the others. All right, so the image of the child just learning to walk. We talked about this. We're a little uncertain, a little scared. Things are unsettling. We know we can do it, but do we? So does that characterize the United States' decision to seek independence? No, and I don't think we're being called juvenile. That seems a little insulting. And this is after the independence has already happened. So I think we can probably get rid of A. Emphasize the inexperience of Americans in navigating their new political position. That feels pretty accurate because we know we can walk, but we don't know what step to take first. Acknowledge the naivety of Americans in believing in an equitable society. We haven't reached the discussion of equitable society in this piece, so I think we can get rid of C. Criticize the United States' attempt to become isolated from the rest of the world. Again, we have not reached isolation in this piece yet. It's just independence, and those are two very different I words. So it must be B. Okay, Warren implies that after Americans won independence, they questioned whether they would be what? So let's see. Forced to rejoin Great Britain to secure their financial future. Able to return to the occupations they held before the war. Able to create a political system that appeases all citizens. Beholden to other countries because of their amassed debt. Okay, so I know this is going to be after line 7. And before this area where they talked about education, most likely. I know that even though it's an inference question, I should be able to find a line that answers it. So let's go back and try to see what we can find. We need something that asserts it's after they won their independence. Okay, so education is kind of around here. We know it's after 7. Theory of republicanism from the versatility of human affairs. So this isn't necessarily about... I don't see anything in here that shows that we've won the war or separated ourselves from England. And this goes on to talk about the education, so hopefully it's around here somewhere, even if it's not right before. You know what? I wonder if that discussion of king is showing that that's after the war, because it says that we've shaken off the yoke of foreign domination and annihilated the name of king. So this is what we're looking for. Let's see what it says. They were ignorant of the intrigues of courts, and though convinced of the necessity of government, did not fully understand its nature or origin. They had generally supposed there was little to do but to shake off the yoke. Okay, so we thought there was little to do but shake off the yoke of this foreign king. They were not generally sensible that most established modes of strong government are usually the consequence of fraud or violence. They were not sensible that all these things set to the renunciation. All right, so let's see what we can kind of assert from there. Okay, so it's a lot of uncertain. So there's nothing that discusses us rejoining Britain. There's nothing that talks about the occupations that we held before the war. That's actually much later in the passage, so I think this is coming from the wrong place in the passage. Are they able to create a political system that appeases all? Maybe, because there was a lot of talk about uncertainty of like what to do next, or even whether we need to do anything next. So we'll hold on to that one. If they'll be beholden to other countries because of their amassed debt. Again, I think debt comes up much later in the passage, so I'm going to assume that this one is incorrect. So it must be C that they're wondering. All right, content characterization, America's knowledge, and we're contrasting that with something. We found that earlier. So America's knowledge of areas of study, so it's like academic knowledge, is different from our understanding of what, and I think we marked that one. Okay, yet many of them had but superficial knowledge of mankind. They were ignorant of the intrigues of courts, and though convinced of the necessity of government, did not fully understand. So I think it's this idea of like mankind and kind of how the human world works. So let's see what we can find that connects to that. Human nature. So it says that they are well-versed in literature and more educated than other countries. We do talk about like democracy, but it's not that they are comparing it to the theories of democracy, just how we kind of attack those. So I think it's human nature. It's a content question also. So because it specifically says mankind, we want to find something that is directly linked to that. So human nature works. All right, number 37, content question, and we have a COE follow-up. So Warren characterizes Americans of the post-Revolutionary War as... Okay, so we need to see Americans after the war. Let's look at 19 through 24 first. Okay, 19. through 24. Or whether such, if established, would be administered agreeable to laws founded on the beautiful theory of republicanism depictured in the Closets of Philosophers. So it sounds like this is talking back to like the government being consolidated, so I don't think this is about American people. All right, B, 25 through 28. It is indeed true that from a general attention to early education, the people of the United States were better informed. So this is about Americans, but it's not necessarily about Americans of the post-Revolutionary War. That was kind of true of like the pre-Revolutionary War as well. Also, it's very rare that they will use a line of evidence for more than one question. So because we already talked about that area for number 36, they're not likely going to use that for another question because the answer would be the same as the answer for 36 most likely. Let's look at C, 30 through 35. All right, so 30 to 35. Okay, they were ignorant of the intrigues of courts, and though convinced of the necessity of government, they did not fully understand its nature or origin. They had generally supposed there was little to do but to shake off the yoke of foreign domination and annihilate the name of king. Okay, we did already use this one, but that does talk about post-revolution, and it does say that they're ignorant and that they thought that there was little to do, like once we shook off those yoke of foreign domination, that like there was nothing left to do. So that might be it. Let's see what D says. Line 62 through 69. Then a possession of real stability. It may be acquired today in all the triumph of independent feelings, but perhaps tomorrow the world may be convinced that mankind know not how to make a proper use of the prize. So this prize and this it are talking back about kind of the government and the stability. So I don't think this is about Americans. So we can actually get rid of that one. So it must be C. And I think it's this idea of like ignorant and thinking that we didn't have to do anything else. Okay. So everything is fine because we've shaken off the yokes and we don't know any better. So naive does mean not know any better. Idealistic, like things are fine the way they are, maybe. Aimless and neglected. I think even if you tried to argue aimless, the neglected would be problematic. We haven't been neglected. We chose our independence. Imaginative and resourceful. This seems to be oppositional because it seems to be saying that we are ignorant and don't know what to do next, which would be the opposite of resourceful enough to figure out what to do next. And then learned and cultured, again, that goes more to, if we had chosen line B, I think we would have accidentally chosen D and gotten both of these wrong. We're not suddenly learned and cultured because the war is over. So I think it is this naive. Naive goes well with that ignorant and us not knowing what to do next, or us thinking that all we have to do is win the war and all of a sudden, yay, freedom. That does sound pretty idealistic. So I think A is our answer. So now we can look at number 39. Warren claims there is a historical pattern. So this was like something about most governments are some kind of way. We know this is going to be between line 48 and this area where we found this contrast. So let's see something about most governments are. Like we marked something here. Most established modes of government, okay, are usually the consequence of fraud or violence against the system of democratic theories. Okay, well, let's see if we can find something that talks about being the result of fraud or violence. Reluctant to impose constraints on their citizens. All right, I don't see that. Unable to discontinue policies enforced by their previous leaders. I don't see anything about previous leaders, at least in that section. Enabled by their citizens' blind trust to act without oversight. Let's see, what was it? Fraud and violence? I don't think that's necessarily blind trust and oversight. willing to use treachery or intimidation to make. Oh, okay, so this is the fraud, and this is the violence. So I think D's our correct answer. All right, number 40 is a COE standalone. Best evidence that after the war, Americans wanted a political system that did not require much of them. So we need to prove that Americans didn't really want to do much for this political system. They wanted something easy breezy, beautiful cover girl, I guess. 39 through 44. So starting here. They were not sensible that from age to age the peoples are flattered, deceived, or threatened until the hoodwinked multitudes set their own seals of renunciation on their privilege and with their own hands rivet the chains of servitude on their posterity. So that seems like it more talks about how leadership is established, not that we don't want to do anything on this for this political system. So let's try the next one, 48 through 52. Let's see. These they had freely lavished to secure their equality of condition, their easy modes of subsistence, and their exemption from public burdens beyond the necessary demands for the support of a free and equal government. Okay, so that beyond the necessary demands, maybe? They worked real hard, but then they feel like they got their exemption from public burdens beyond the necessary demands, and we do have this idea of government. Okay, so maybe. It's definitely enough to hold on to. C is line 55 through 57. New created exigencies or more splendid modes of government that might hereafter be adopted had not yet come within the reach of their calculations. So it does mention government, but it just kind of says that other things are not yet available to them. So I don't think that talks about us not wanting to do much. 80 through 85. Thus, by habit, they are ready to believe that mankind in general are incapable of the enjoyment of that liberty which nature seems to prescribe, and that the mass of the people have not the capacity nor the right to choose their own masters. So again, this kind of talks about how we choose our leadership, or whether we're even capable of choosing our leadership and enjoying that true liberty. It doesn't talk about us not wanting to be heavily involved. So I think B is the correct answer based on this beyond the necessary demands portion. Okay, just two more questions, and then we'll move on to the next passage. As used in line 48, the word secure. So we kind of talked about like gain, ensure. Okay, so I don't think it's fasten. We're not securing it down like lashings in a truck bed or anything. Definitely not control. And so if we look at guarantee versus promise, we don't want to promise our freedom. It's kind of an inversion of that relationship. So I think it means guarantee. We want to make sure it happens. Someone else would have to promise us something. So I think we can get rid of C. Last one, number 42. Warren states that rulers are appointed through deceptive means and by. So we need something about lying or deception. Oh, we found that here. The game of deception is played over and over to mislead the judgment of men and work on their enthusiasm until by their own consent hereditary crowns and distinctions are fixed. So by their own consent, rulers are appointed. So consent. Oh, look, compliance. So there's nothing about economics. We do talk about like persuasion, but that's more in the deception part. So that would just be a reiteration of something we've already stated. And then there's no bartering described. Again, it's a content question. So consent equals compliance. Making that connection is going to be helpful. Okay, only one more passage left.